all at any point in time. The main entrance from here you come into the hall will serve as the major fire exit, and we have 3 alternative fire exits at the back of the hall. But be rest assured, we have members of emergency response teams on ground that will assist you in case there is any need to evacuate the room in case of emergency. Likewise, we have medical facility within the premises in case there is anybody that have medical situation. In case you need to ease yourself, walk down along the red carpet a little bit. By your right-hand side here, you can find the restrooms for both the ladies and gentlemen. Ladies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as an organization, Eko Hotel consider this event as a public event. And as a result of that, if there is any complaint, any observation, or any issue, please feel free to call to us. We are on ground and we shall respond to you immediately. Once again, I welcome you all, and I wish you a splendid day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As usual, I always tell them not to include certain announcements. For example, where tea and coffee is, well, lunch will be served. I reserve that. I have a few recognitions, but first and foremost, I would like to recognize, please put your hands together for the Right Honorable Rotimi Chibuke Amechi, the Honorable Minister of Transportation of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. We welcome you on behalf of the partners, management, and team of Deloitte Nigeria. Deloitte is a very big family, and please may I recognize the managing partner and other partners at Deloitte Nigeria. Please stand up for recognition. Give them a round of applause, please. Thank you very much. They are the organizers. Please be seated, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for bringing us together for this event. And to get started, we'll do a few other recognitions. We thank our speakers who are here. I can see Emma Esiloro. Thank you very much, Emma. Stand up for recognition. It's good to have you here. We appreciate your presence. The country manager for the IFC. I'll recognize myself at the end of the program, just before we go for lunch. Meantime, please put your hands together for Folarin. Where are you, Folarin? You're the one giving us the opening address. Please bring him to the podium with a very good round of applause. Fatai Folarin is the West Africa Chief Executive Officer of Deloitte Nigeria.
Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. For this year, the 2020 Deloitte in Dialogue Nigeria Economic Outlook. And I'd like to use this opportunity to also welcome in our midst the Minister of Transport. Right, we're expecting His Excellency, the Governor of Lagos State, to also be part of us, and also the Minister of Finance. We have the assurance they are going to join us in the course of our deliberation. Today, I would like also to thank you all, distinguished guests, speakers, panelists, and everybody for honoring this invitation. I know it's not quite easy to get us out of our office. It's a recognition of the fact that we're all part and joint owner of the Nigerian Deloitte to contribute to the discourse on the Nigeria economic transformation and running. We also feel, and as a professional services firm that cares in delivering values to the society, our people, and the community to which we serve, we see this as a contribution that is absolutely necessary for us to continue to sustain. Make a bit of bold steps in terms of taking forward discourse on the Nigeria future, the development of the country, and what what does it hold for business? How does business benefit from this journey? And what are those things that is how well and the endowed resources in the country, and how we can get followership to actually shape the thought of leadership, which was, for me was quite profound. And I think from the Honorable Rotimi Amici, that's quite profound. Thank you for that comment. Equally, as we move on, we will be looking at how can we, as a professional services firm in Deloitte, continue to contribute to the socio-economic development of the country. We are able to make the difference that is profound for us to look at the fact that we've even been able to pass, for the first time in a long while, this in itself provide an opportunity for business to properly plan and prepare for the future. This is also something that is quite unique, to which we need to also give credit to the National Assembly and Mr. President for his efforts in actually coming up with the bill, a fiscal finance bill, and that was eventually signed by the President to enact, which also enable companies and businesses to start planning and also be able to assess how do they want to structure their business. For us, this is an indication that the country is set for a better future. And we're quite happy to really to give a credit to the President for this achievement. Moving forward is in terms of how do we contribute as business in making sure that the country also see the benefit of these changes that we're beginning to see in Nigeria. And I guess the government will also continue to see this from the revenue that will be generated in the process, and how businesses will also be able to take investment, encourage investment to come into the country. We would like to believe that with working with you at Deloitte, we will be able to answer some of those peculiar facts that we set ourselves for, which is providing the assurance in the business and offering solutions to people and our business and clients, and also helping to reduce and encourage confidence in the country, because we get asked questions everywhere we go. So for us, we really appreciate you for being here. And as a Deloitte firm in Nigeria, this is our own little way of contributing to the society, and part of a way where we talk about making the impact in the society that really matters to the economy. Thank you very much.
This event is 20. First presentation comes from someone who understands the business of inclusive growth, of productive potential of Nigerian people, the resources, and how we can put all of this together to make a very good portfolio, to create jobs, to deliver on critical infrastructure, to deliver on a number of areas that the government is pursuing. I see to speak to us on jump-starting inclusive growth, unlocking the productive potential of Nigeria's people and resource endowments. Do I need to add that she's a fantastic speaker? A round of applause, please.
How do I need the slides? Do you know? Good morning. I am going to rest on all the previous protocols, and there should be a slide presentation coming up. Oh, perfect. Okay. Again, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for taking the time to come out and have this conversation. I very much on some of those points in my week in Lagos, focusing on the economic outlook. And I was thinking to myself, perhaps Nigerians are a little bit obsessed about the economic outlook. But again, I think this is a good thing. There is a sense of a need to plan and look ahead. But I think actually the term economic outlook about the policy private sector response should be. So this logic absolutely makes sense. After all, we know that the private sector is interested in a transparent, a consistent, a non-punitive enabling environment for them to do business and be profitable, one that encourages on that. But I suspect that we could have a different debate as well around the role of policy. Again, sometimes I think that the conversations weigh much too heavily on the policy response, the policy environment. There's no won't do. Again, policies, good policies are instrumental to having an inclusive growth agenda. There's no question about that. Reforms that there's still a startup tech space as two examples of that. There's an incredible amount of dynamism in Nigeria and an ability for Nigerians to navigate even in very, very challenging circumstances. I also think there's another challenge that I think we must really own up to. We always say that, at least those of us in the development world, we always say that there's a broken social contract in Nigeria, that the populace, the electorate, doesn't trust government, and so therefore you have situations, for example, where there's low tax compliance. But I think we also have a fractured business contract between government and the private sector. We don't have enough trust between these two critical stakeholders in the ecosystem. So it's pretty low. And I think, so while we're always advocating for good policies, for robust policies, and we're always advocating to build trust between the private sector and government, we must also just get on with it because these things take time and we should be in a hurry in Nigeria. So I want to propose two tracks for the private sector, and this is the way we're thinking at IFC. There's the policy-driven piece. That's important and we should always advocate for that. But there's also a track that requires more innovation and more collaboration in the private sector, focusing much more, for example, at the subnational level, which I think there's a lot of power and opportunity to have impact at that. We think that there is an absolute opportunity for that in Nigeria. Again, we don't see this as a choice. We do need to have both. But again, we see huge potential for in areas where you don't really have to have a heavy policy instrument to make things happen. So again, Honorable Minister, I am not advocating absolving government from its responsibilities in terms of policy. It's absolutely critical, but I do think that we have a very dynamic private sector in Nigeria, and things can be done outside of the policy framework that are very, very impactful in Nigeria. And this, I think, gives us this slide. So I know many of you in this room love numbers, so I wanted to start with the numbers for those of you who think that way. So just take a look at this slide. Whenever we start talking about growth and GDP, I like to bring it down to reality. I like to ask myself the question, why do we care? Why is it important? Why is inclusive who have a dream of sending their children to a good school, having a safe place to live, having good healthcare options, people who they just want to save for the future, people who are essentially the backbone of this society. We had 6%, 7% growth, a huge run on growth. And you'll remember 12, 15 years ago, articles about Africa of the rising from the ashes. But if we are very honest with ourselves, we know that Nigeria had jobless growth. In fact, in some areas of the country, despite the fact that we had high growth, there was increasing poverty in Nigeria. So that is not tenable for the future. So these statistics that I've put here give us a sense that people in Nigeria, many people, most Nigerians are suffering. Depending on who you are and what you believe in and what you care about, one of these issues will resonate more with you than the others. It could be malnutrition, it could be the issue of youth employment, it could be maternal health. For me, it's the issue of literacy. As you can see there, the statistic is that only 19% of Nigerians who are primary school graduates, only 19%. I'm sure that for all of you, there's some issue that you care deeply about. And it's all of these issues, inclusive growth. We must be relentless about pursuing inclusive growth. We must be absolutely dogged about this. That is why it matters. It matters because of the impact that this has on people in their everyday lives. At IFC, we believe very, very strongly that the private sector can deliver on an inclusive growth agenda, particularly in a place like Nigeria, where the private sector is incredibly dynamic. And we believe that you have to put the private sector very squarely in the middle of delivering on an inclusive growth agenda. It's not government that will deliver on that. It is the private sector that will deliver on that agenda. So, but again, we do want to spend some time talking about policy aspects. So the question is, what needs to happen? We don't think there's a simple solution, but we do believe that boosting productivity will accelerate growth and help create more and better jobs. So if you had to characterize it in a very simple way, again, there's no simple solution, but if you had to characterize it in a simple way, we've done it this way, focusing on boosting productivity and that being the accelerant for more and better paid jobs. So from our perspective, all policy should be designed with this objective in mind. This graph is one way to look at the productivity situation in Nigeria. It's a graph of labor productivity against the main sectors in Nigeria, agribusiness, industry, and services. And as we can see with the red lines there, Nigeria is far away from its aspirational peers. There is a lot to be done, and those aspirational peers, many of them are in Africa, but also in Asia as well. So there's a lot that needs to be done in order for Nigeria to really bridge this productivity gap. So we see 4 key areas where reforms will make a real difference in achieving an inclusive growth agenda in Nigeria. The first being policy transparency and predictability. The second being input quality and availability. The third being key pieces of the puzzle, and I think all of you probably have something that's top of mind for you that would go in any of these buckets. But let's focus first on policy transparency and predictability. And for us right there, the key thing is monetary policy effectiveness. And what does that mean? Again, there's a long list of things that one can put under that title, but for us at IFC and at the World Bank Group, for us, number one, evaluating the effectiveness of development finance interventions and import substitution policies. Key thing to address under that one. Also, the perennial discussion around unification of the exchange rate into a single window. That remains an objective that I know the government also is pursuing as well, but still has eluded us for quite some time. And then also strengthening the banking resolution framework. Those are just a few that I think come under that bucket. The second one, domestic revenue mobilization and expenditure quality. Key one as well. We've seen in the last couple of years quite a bit of progress in that regard, at least efforts on the part of government to move it forward, but not as much as we'd like to see in terms of results. A key one there is going to be increasing non-oil revenue through comprehensive tax policy and administration reforms. I always like it when people have the debate around why Nigerians don't pay taxes, how we can get Nigerians to pay more taxes. This goes back to the question of the broken social contract that desperately needs fixing in order to move this agenda forward. I think we all know that Nigeria is in the lowest ranks with respect to revenue as a percentage of GDP, transparency and predictability. We have trade policy. And there, I'd say top of mind for us is phasing out foreign exchange restrictions and import prohibitions. Not because we think that some of these things are bad things, but simply because they tend to be done in a way that isn't consistent with a longer term objective. So they're done maybe as a knee-jerk reaction rather than a part of a holistic plan to move a sector forward, to increase, for example, a domestic capacity for manufacturing. So that's the first bucket. The second one is input quality and availability. Now, this is also an important one because this is where infrastructure comes into play. The first one being power and transport infrastructure. I think many of you have seen statistics around the cost of movement of goods within Nigeria and then from Nigeria to other parts of the world. Really depressing, frankly, at the end of the day when we think about how much it costs to just move things around within the country. In addition to power sector reforms, and we could spend 2 days talking about that, but let's assume that that's the key one to get done. We also see a need to establish a framework for land management for investment in agriculture. And our belief is that the failure to address these land management issues, and I know this is done at the subnational level, is probably the biggest deterrent to investment in agriculture in Nigeria. The second one here is human capital. A couple of years ago, the World Bank Group produced a human capital index where we basically measured countries against their ability to invest in young people and then what it takes for them to get to a place where they are productive adults, where they can actually contribute to the economy. Nigeria did very badly on that index. I think many of you saw that. I think it was 152 out of 157. So very, very poorly. And for those of you who remember Nigeria from the 60s across Africa. So this one is a key one. And I always like focusing on this one because, again, it's about people. And for me, you have to start with people in order to get anything right. One of the key things we'd like to see here is an implementation of a national skills development strategy that would then align the supply of skills with the market needs. Last, I would say on this slide would be trade facilitation. There, we all know the stories there about the costs and the issues at the ports, at the borders. That one I think is well discussed again and again, a key one that needs to be addressed. The next area, reform area for us, is around the reduction of regulatory discretion. All of you will have felt the pain of that, I think, over the years. This is an important third piece of the puzzle. You're in the future, or you don't have a list of things that could go under this bucket of reduction of regulatory discretion. But essentially, we've captured them all around transaction costs and really trying to level the playing field for investors. So they're easy things. I think there's some things that are low-hanging fruit in that area. You have the adoption of the company's Allied Matters Act as one, digitizing regulatory processes, another, strengthening the capacity of the competition authority. There are a number of things that could go under there that ultimately will address this issue of reduction of regulatory discretion. When we think about Nigeria, we know that we have weak institutions, and this is where this really comes to play. And then the last piece of the puzzle is access to finance. It is a key piece of the reform puzzle for Nigeria. And actually, I think that access to finance starts to fall into place when you get the other pieces right as well. When they're in position, access to finance tends to solve itself. For us, when we think about access to finance, we think about financial deepening and inclusion. That's critical for us. And again, you have a laundry list of things to do to make that happen. A number of them, again, will be low-hanging fruit, finish line. For example, now actually applying the guidelines for the licensing of the payment service state. Other states are trying to follow suit, but to lend to SMEs. Consolidation in the microfinance sector as well. We've seen that as something that, again, low-hanging fruit that can happen. Also enacting the data protection bill. Again, a long list of things that can be done with a bit of political will, but not taking so much political will that would really move the needle. So, you put all these four things together, the puzzle comes together, and we believe that they can now work in concert. Again, we could have a long conversation about some of the key things that you think are important that should be here, and maybe in the panels that will follow a bit later, we will unearth some of those things. My sense is that if we throw 300 things out there and try and get 300 things done, we won't succeed. There's a real necessity to prioritize and to sequence and just to bite off what we can chew. So my sense is that it's really important to focus on a few key things as a first step, and that would be aligning the private sector around that and then the government around that as well. So that focuses again on the reform piece where government is critical to get these things done. Again, we all know what some of these second, but there's broad agreement that these are things that are critical for the reform agenda going forward. Again, that's now what government should do. I just wanted to take a moment to make a case for the revival of some of our pundits and economists internally have this debate about whether industrialization makes sense. I'm not sure I understand exactly what the issues are. Perhaps it just means too many things to too many different people. Industrialization will be different for every country that wants to implement it. I suppose maybe that's part of the challenge. But again, I want to make a case for a revived industrialization agenda and really keeping that front and center in Nigeria. And this is where I think the private sector can actually demonstrate even more leadership to make this happen, that government actually can follow, private sector can lead in this regard. The most recent one was the Nigeria Industrial Revolution Plan that wanted to increase manufacturing sector contribution to GDP above what it is now, which is about 10%, by speeding up industrialization in key sectors, construction, agribusiness, solid minerals, but it hasn't, but not a lot of action behind it. In fact, despite all of these initiatives over time, it was about 17% of GDP in 1998. Today, it's just above 8%. Well, in 2017, it was just above 8%. Now, this is well below Nigeria's peers in Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Morocco. All of them have double-digit MVAs. So again, lots of effort, lots of good intentions, but actually it's had the reverse effect because manufacturing has actually fallen in its contribution. So what I want to make the case for here is what we can see in terms of an industrialization agenda led by the private sector. So what we have today is we have low-skilled, labor-intensive industries, are very much a focus on tradable and commodity-based and domestic processing, so very much insular focused. But we know, and this is where the catalyst comes in, that there is a strong positive correlation between GDP per capita, we think applies to Nigeria as well. This can be the catalyst. And then where do we want to get to? We want to get to a place where we have capital-intensive, regionally processed goods, such as chemicals. We see a huge potential for chemicals and chemical products in Nigeria. Nigeria can be a leader in that regard. As well as that, medium-skill sectors as well, where you can have globally innovative goods such as machinery, transportation, electrical projects, and this is where the jobs angle comes into play. So this is the transition that we see in Nigeria that can be driven very much by the private sector. To do this well, we'll need to have industrial zones that provide shared infrastructure that helps build it in the near term. Think about what Saudi Arabia has in a relatively short period of time. This next slide just shows you what we think is a rough scheme of the opportunity map for Nigeria. This is why people say Nigeria has so much potential. So the y-axis is the upside, and the x-axis is sector feasibility. And that's mostly because of a very substantial set of existing endowments. And if you look closely, you'll see that whether it's oil palm or chemicals or plastics or meat and poultry, there are a number of opportunities where Nigeria is very, very well positioned to now. I think we, like Malaysia, maybe 30 years ago, 40 years, pushed contribution went from 22% of total export in, say, 1980 to about 80% in 2015. That's for Malaysia. And then the primary sector declined as a contribution as well. Similar situation in Indonesia. So again, those were government-driven agendas. You had a lot of focus, and they aligned people to make that happen. They were visionaries. It took a lot of political, quite a bit of leadership to make this happen for the country. So how does that happen? I think that there are opportunities for much more deeper collaboration amongst private sector players, much more innovative partnerships with states. We've seen some of those examples already, but there's so much more that can be done. Again, the industrialization agenda for Nigeria doesn't have to be policy-driven. In fact, the policy environment is generally okay for it to make it happen. But again, there's more leadership in the private sector that I think that is necessary to drive that forward. And again, by having you come together as the private sector and working collaboratively, we can see that. Today, many of you advocate individually for your project, for what you want to do. There's much more power when you come together as a group, as a cohort of private sector players that have a common cause. You can use Deloitte to help you do that. Institutions like IFC, development institutions, can also help play a role of help kind of organizing the thought process around that. But again, it can be driven by the private sector. It's not going to be driven by everybody serving their individual interests. So this slide is the aspirational slide. This slide shows us that realistically, it's not pie in the sky that we can have an economy in Nigeria that's $6,000 plus per capita with jobs, with sustainable jobs. It is possible. It is not a dream that can't be accomplished. But there's also the business as usual scenario, which is the line at the bottom. The business of usual scenario, as usual scenario, is Nigeria stumbling along. It's not necessarily a doomsday scenario, which a lot of people think is going to happen here. But certainly you have Nigeria falling away from its potential, its peers doing much better. It gets us to a $0.7 trillion economy by 2040 with 340 million people, and a bit lower in terms of per capita income. So highly unattractive, and certainly would lay the grounds for increasing social unrest. But the aspirational view, which does require reforms, but it also requires leadership in the private sector and collaboration in the private sector, gets us to a $2 trillion economy. And by doubling per capita income, and very importantly, slower population growth, that is critical, population growth in the country. So women are a very important part of that agenda. So again, this aspiration we think is very possible with the right of reform agenda. And again, so in closing, I would like to bring it back to where we started, at least where I started, why this matters. In Nigeria, I don't think we have the luxury of risking the pursuit of growth without focusing on how we can improve the livelihoods of poor working families, how we can improve educational and health outcomes for children, how we can prepare young people for work, and how we can create sustainable jobs for those young people, how we can address long-standing underinvestment in rural communities, particularly in the northern part of the country, how we can increase opportunities for women in school and in the workplace. And while we're doing all of that, how we can protect by Simon Sinek. This is our why. It needs to be a people-centered approach for growth. This is why growth matters. It matters because it impacts the lives of people across the country, people who are the backbone of this society. We believe that we're aspirate private sector in the middle of that, collectively with the government to make that agenda come true. Thank you.
At those very four key pillars very much, and of course, part of what you presented provides the feedstock for some of the conversations to do with infrastructure. And then we'll talk about the financial landscape now. Let's add a bit more on the finance side to the conversation. And Yomi is one gentleman I find very difficult to interview on television, because it seems to need live studios together. Put your hands together for Yomi Gbero, who is a partner, West Africa tax lead at Deloitte, Nigeria. He's the man I called, or we called, the tax oracle. Thank you.
Good morning, very distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Bosin is very fond of setting me up. Very delighted to have every one of you in the audience to be part of this important day that we recognize all of you. I can UKK, GMDFBN Holding, so a lot of dignitary so the subject of the changes. A number of times when I speak to businesses, you know that of all of the policies of government and all of the actions what is doing, and you probably want to hear some bit of critical comments, just ask about taxation. So and everybody shares views and perspective about this. And it's an important conversation to have, because whether we're talking include, having a base that provides the way we think as part of this dialogue. I'll try to provide country today. What are the changes happening? And I will try to dwell on the most recent one, the Finance Act, and some of the other key changes that we're having within the regulatory space. And what are the action items for everyone and where we need to go. As current and capital actually have a valid conversation is recognizing the fact that the country needs to upscale the amount of revenue that is available to it. And there are statistics that speak to this very clearly. You compare it to those doing better than. Nigeria sits within a mix that shows a significant gap at 7% tax to GDP ratio in terms of average. OECD is above 34. So there's something about the level of tax penetration and the non-oil tax revenue that we can make. Now, that should be a fact that we should all see it. If you sit on the side of government, Nigerians to be compliant, the fact that a number of people will try to find means and ways, of paying the least possible, and the list can go on. If you sit on the side of the private sector, you would discuss challenges around doing business in Nigeria, paying taxes, and a whole lot of things that encourages voluntary compliance. And look at the budget numbers, some of the statistics that is shown above. Look at the trend of revenue. The top one shows the revenue. As for 2020 budget, we're expecting to generate maybe a little over 8 trillion naira. For an economy of our size, 8 trillion naira, assuming all assumptions met, all targets met, our historical performance has never shown that we usually hit that target. Capital outlay plan around 10.6 trillion. Look at the quantum, the mix between, capital and debt servicing. The blue one right on top at 2.5 is current non-debt 4.8 trillion. Of course, there is a different conversation that this shows in terms of the appropriateness of the mix. But the bureaucracies of government are making sure that we meet some of the constitutional requirements in terms of the size of cabinet or the number of people we'll appoint. There's a lot of tough issues, within there that are difficult to resolve. With the connection between how much of revenue we're able to make and the ease of doing business, the graphs, maybe the top bottom, kind of speak to that. We must recognize the fact that as much as Nigeria is making very commendable progress towards making doing business easy, the place where we sit is still not yet very close at all to destination, right? And council and a number of the government policies, we've moved from 170 that we were in 2015, for example, down to 131 by the last rating, that represent for 2020. Good as that shows in terms of progression, but 131 is where we are out of a 190, nations that are covered. So there's still a long road ahead. In terms of paying taxes, out of the same 190, we've moved from 182 years back, very few years back, we're sitting in the bottom 9 out of the 190. Now we've moved progressively. We're now below 160. We're now 159. But it is not yet the destination. And there is a link between what the environment shows and how much of revenue. And that's why you see the FRS tax revenue. The highest we've had so far is the 2018, where FRS was able to generate above 5 trillion, 5.3 trillion. The closest to it was 2012, when we made about 5 trillion. My estimate is that the 2019 number, when they're out, won't be up to 2018, maybe something between 5 trillion or a little when you make a lot of revenue. So, best still far. 2020 projection is something within the range of 8 trillion. Now, but let's move forward in terms of the major changes that are happening, and I think that's part of the conversation that I'm sure many of us seated here are interested in. A lot of things are changing within the fiscal landscape, and these are big tickets. I have put on the board maybe about 6 of them, all right? So changes happen in response to what is happening in the economy. Volatility on some triggers of them require very detailed conversation and analyzing how it impacts business, what more should government do, how should they be implemented, and how are we preparing businesses, to live in this era. If I take the Finance Act, and in fact the first 2 are part of our focus for this session today. Very deliberate choice. We're going to be having a panel with the finance minister once she speaks to the piece of infrastructure, particularly on the rate side and what we're doing. The finance, all of our major tax laws were touched. There are 7 in number actually that were touched. The Companies Income Tax, the Personal Income Tax, Capital Gains Tax Act, Value Added Tax Act, Customs and Excise and Stamp Duty Act, and Petroleum Profit Tax. All our revenue generating laws were amended. And there are a number of far-reaching changes. I will speak to them a little later. The infrastructure tax credit, which is also another response from the government as a PPP initiative towards bridging the infrastructure gap, it's one that I think corporates also need to leverage and understand. Government recognizes the deficiency it has in terms of funding and the limitation it has in terms of going. It remains an issue that the component is higher than the capital expenditure. And you know that we will have to meet our obligation for debt servicing. We will most likely meet our recurrent of the over 2 trillion. We may end up in certain years not doing more than half of that, or a little more than half in a number of years. So the infrastructure tax credit, government is saying, bring in your private capital, develop road infrastructure, claim MPR from plus 2% that is added on as return for your investment. And you're able to claim that over 5 years with some rules and guidelines. Now, these are huge provisions that is practically opening up itself from the 200 million or thereabout population it has to about 1.2 billion. Deal with the critical emphasis. Some of them you see them in changes, parts of the strategic growth initiative, to all of the data that are available. Close to the 70, you need to sense them ahead and make sure it's around how multinational companies are being taxed with changes in transfer pricing regulation, mutual agreement procedure, and a whole country-by-country reporting, for example. These are game-changing with huge penalties. Before the new transfer pricing regulation came in, if you fail to file your transfer pricing returns, for example, or your disclosure it's faulty or wrong, the penalties is probably like a slap on the wrist. But now they are in millions. And so it's no longer an era where you think it doesn't matter. The day the revenue authority stands up to ask for the level of compliance in terms of your disclosure, in terms of your documentation, and in terms of the adequacy of the information you've provided, the penalty is meeting that is being led by OECD, which Nigeria has signed up to, is the automatic information exchange, or the common reporting standard. Now, this practically offers national governments data about their taxpayer, exchange of info had just been more information about your income and about your business flow with the revenue authority. Nigeria is only waiting for its infrastructure to be examined by the global forum. When that is done, this exchange takes place. So these are fundamental conversations that are going on that business need to be aware of. But just one of the key pieces of my presentation is to extract, particularly for you, the impact or some of the fundamental changes that is happening with the Finance Act. I did mention that there are 7 laws that were amended. The changes covers a number of policy intention by government. One of it is that over time changes a taxpayer. I was really very surprised during the discussion on the finance bill that a lot of attention was focused on the VAT increase, which is, of course, one of the changes introduced by the Finance Act, but it's not in any way close to taxes. Many of us this morning have paid VAT on a number of transactions. It may be the collecting agent are fewer. All of us, as we transact, we pay those VAT, and it's only one vendor. Maybe perhaps of the over 500 or 600 of us seated here, maybe the number of vendors that needed to account for those VAT are just 50. So the administrative burden of chasing after, very pleasant for me, is that in an economy where we recognize the fact that there is need to reflate the economy and keep money in circulation, what you do is to reduce taxes on companies and taxes on individuals, increase disposable income, and those disposable income is then plowed back into the economy, and whatever you are losing in the short term from the reduction in direct taxes, you gain on the indirect taxes because the propensity to consume is very high. Some economists say it's as high as 0.8. So for every 1 naira you have, you probably will spend 80 kobo. And for each spending, there is a tax point. So this Finance Act made some change to pay out. You have more ability to rules for determining minimum tax that uses capital, and net assets, and those kind of parameters that tend to, take back from the capital. So those rules have been removed. You have commencement and cessation rule that taxes are removed. So this is some benefit to taxpayer. For example, prior to this, it doesn't matter whether. So I think for me, MSMEs are the biggest beneficiary of the Finance Act. On the VAT side, the need to register, the need to charge VAT for small businesses was completely removed. If your revenue is 25 million naira or less, you don't have to. Incentive on the corporate tax side, where small businesses will have 0 CIT if your turnover is below 25. Micro businesses have reduced corporate tax of 20%, and only the large corporate retain the 30%. So a lot of uses. For example, think capitalization has now been introduced into our tax legislation, where the amount of interest expense you could take is now limited to 30% of your EBITDA, and you spread. The whole game plan is that when we do all of this, plus the incentive and benefit that have been given to business, ultimately, government should be able to raise some more revenue. But also worthy to be discussed is how to manage in addition around the inflationary impact comes in and what measures government is doing to take away that. Implementation challenges is another critical pillar, and I'm sure the finance minister will be speaking to that. What is the transition framework? The bill has been signed. We've had announcement that the VAT will begin from framework. And maybe the last point to mention on this is that we recognize that as much as this is a good to have, this is a very commendable intervention, it won't resolve all of our issues. We still have some, major issue on the table to deal with. I'll try to run through the rest of my slide very quickly. So, if you listen to the way I had presented the Finance Act, you'll see that there are upside and there are downside prospects to the Finance Act. So, on the one side, we're expecting that it will help government to expand the tax base, maybe implementation issues, the transitionary framework, and making sure that rules are easy. On the individual and MSMEs, we've discussed the fact that, yes, you have 0 CIT exemption, but it doesn't mean that you won't file your return. So there's still some conversation around how do I ensure compliance so I don't lose my benefit. VAT exemptions for small businesses is there, but some of the conversation that should be happening is how does this actually affect my cost of input? Because if I don't have the capacity if I no longer have to charge VAT when I sell, it doesn't mean that when I go to store and when I go to input provider, I won't be charged VAT. When you are charged VAT and the cost of your input is higher and you don't have the capacity to pass it on by way of output, it brings a different kind of dynamics in terms of what can be the case when this Finance Act becomes fully implemented. So how do you deal with the new dynamics? On the large corporate side, we've spoken to the corporate tax benefit, but you should also recognize the increasing pressure on transparency and reporting and accountability. So a new configuration is required within your finance function to deal with it. And obviously the overall impact of the potential high cost of input, from VAT side on your top line and on your bottom line. So many conversation needs to happen here. This piece, as I think through some of the changes and can't resist the temptation to applaud, and the need to applaud what government is doing, we recognize the fact that there are a lot more tough conversation that we must continue to have. The Finance Act is a short-term intervention to get our revenue mobilization drive to a point where it is sustainable. There are some tough choices that we still have to make. For example, there's consistency of application. As much as we deal with all of the uncertainties and volatility, we recognize the fact that the amount of tax revenue that a government derives is a fraction of the economic profitability or prosperity. If the business, it is a fraction of the economic transaction that you collect by way of tax. So we must deal with how to drive inclusive growth and make sure taxes, the number of agencies we need to relate with, the capacity of the revenue authority, the platform they are using, and how investment. The fact is that there is fact-based, feedback from the large corporate and from the country that increased transparency, increased accountability, increased judicious use of funds, so that the trust deficit issue can be dealt with. So, requirements, particularly because of the Finance Act. Today is 28. In few days' time, the Finance Act will become fully implemented based on the pronouncement that we have. But we don't have the official Gazette version, and you cannot apply law, speculatively. We need to have the official Gazette to release. We need to have guidelines. We need to have transitional framework for a number of things. So very urgent. We need to put in measures for performances, measurement and evaluation, so that we can build in input for the next finance bill, for example, that's supposed to be accompanying the 2021 budget for starters. And we must recognize that holistic regulatory reform is still a priority. Finance Bill has made, or Finance Act has made very commendable intervention, but it hasn't resolved and it won't resolve. And thankfully, the government also did recognize that this is not meant to resolve all of our issues. So we shouldn't lose our focus and make sure that a holistic regulatory framework. Companies Income Tax Act is a 1979 act. So what we have done with the Finance Bill is to do some panel beating of an old vehicle to be able to ply a new road. We really need modern vehicle to ply a modern road. My concluding thought, final slide for business, is to anticipate and sense the changes that are happening around. You may be running into troubled waters. The kind of headwinds and tailwinds happening from global to Africa will continuously require responses from government. And that responses will often trigger increasing need for revenue. So you must build structure that enables you to anticipate and sense changes. You must block compliance leakages. If it is difficult to raise the revenue and it is increasingly tough to preserve the bottom line, you want to avoid as much as possible every unwanted extra cost that is attendant to non-compliance. In 2019, fines and penalty was an income line item in the budget of the federal government. You don't want to be one of those. Of course, create a response mechanism so that as the regulatory pressure intensify, and I hope you got something.
Yomi Olugbero, thank you very much. Another round of applause, please. Thank you. A very robust presentation on the Finance Act and fiscal to the conversation. Part of the first panel, which I'm sure you're looking at, International Planning. She's on her way to this venue as we speak. But then before she arrives, the Nigerian economy in recent years will go down in history. And why do I say so? A number of us in the audience have had reasons to use rail transportation in other parts of the world. And until recent years, railway transportation in Nigeria is associated with moving cows and cattle and watermelons elsewhere. If you ever visited some of the railway stations in Nigeria, for example, the old one in Ibadan, I'm not sure you would want to ever go there again unless you want to buy some cheap tomato and cows and cattle and things like that. He is the one that some of the generations today in Nigeria will remember as the one who puts railway or trains and modern trains as part of Nigeria's infrastructure. And not just part of our infrastructure, but part of our economic portfolio, a very critical part of logistics and everything else we want to achieve, most of it on the back of railways. And our friends are here, development finance institutions and others, and they know how critical rail infrastructure is to economic discourse. Please put your hands together for the Right Honorable Rotimi Amechi to speak to us. Please keep the applause coming. By the way, if you haven't had a free train ride, you can register with me at no cost. Thank you.
Thank you. For those long protocols. And by the way, you won't believe that in government, we are taught to say, if the highest ranking officer that's in the hall, if he's the president, you just say, Mr. President, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. But Nigerians, and you, special assistant to special assistant. I want to intervene in the discussions by the last two speakers. I didn't think that value system, law and order. Okay, railways. No, hold on. Railways. Itabewari railway is ready. Where are the cargoes for it? Where are the cargoes? So to connect Abuja to Warri with a new seaport, cargoes to be conveyed. Nigerians don't like to walk. No, not. If you listen to her, you would think she's an American. If you are an economist, the thing here that all Nigerians are complaining is a disruption to that rent economy. You visit Minister Amechi, the economies. So to start, where is that money coming from? From Nigeria. So I steal money, and I give you maybe probably 10 million naira. You go home, your wife takes 3 million naira. Your father takes 2 million naira. You're left with 5. You pay school fees, 2 million naira. Right? You buy a house, 3 million naira. The 10 is gone. Hold on. From the one your wife has, she goes to the market, buys a goosey. The goosey person pays a doctor. The doctor pays. That's the economy. No, tell me, is there any other? I'm not a graduate of economics. I'm not. I read literature. And that's where Nigerians think, oh, finish Lagos, Ibadan, finish Lagos. How do we produce or move cargoes from Lagos to Ibadan or from Ibadan to Lagos? How much do we produce for you to ask me? Because when you talk about railways, if it is to move passengers, then no need to construct railways. It's quite very expensive. Very, very expensive. We'll soon start the railway from Ibadan to Kano. $5.3 trillion, $5.3 billion, 2 trillion naira for 860 kilometers of railway. They are subsidized, not cows. When we finish, what are we going to move? We have finished Kaduna Abuja rail, not one cargo. We've moved from 300 passengers a day to 3,700 passengers a day. And the same infrastructures that were built for the 300 passengers are the same infrastructures we're still using up to today. Okay? You economists, please start with changing the thought pattern and lines of Nigerians and how to move away. Everybody's abusing President Buhari. It is just that disruption that to make Nigerians value money. You want what Nigerians expect. So every weekend we're in Lagos rocking and dancing and nobody is producing. My elementary knowledge of the Chinese economy. So in the Chinese economy, there's huge production. So they manufacture railway, they manufacture locomotives, coaches, to manufacture. Those people in turn will buy, let's take cars. So they manufacture cars in China. The metals used are produced in China. The people that are manufacturing are living and working in China. The man who gets paid his salary goes to the doctor. The doctor who takes money goes to the market to buy electric bulbs. That's the economy. In Nigeria, you produce nothing and you blame government for you not producing anything. I have asked one question consistently so I can move over to railways. Please show me the private sector in Nigeria. Where are they? Everybody's gone. But I'm a politician, so I don't hold it against me. Let me not discuss that. Back to railways. Back to railways. I don't know what you want to hear about railways. The first one is to correct that erroneous impression that the rail from Lagos to Ibadan is 3 hours from Lagos to Ibadan. That's not true. That's absolutely not true. Desire 6 kilometers will take you to Ibadan by in 1 hour. There are no cows to slow down for. To Lagos from Ibadan, you'll be requiring about 1 hour 15 minutes, 1 hour 30 minutes. There are no customs officers on the way, no police to stop you, no armed robbers to be afraid of, and no kidnappers to worry about. When we start running Lagos Ibadan, there'll be 3 kinds of operation. The first is those who are rich, like you, will give you services that will start from Lagos and end at only 3 locations. One, could drop passengers at Abeokuta. After that, the next passengers will be at, is it morning, you call it, or what? Okay. Which is at Ibadan. That one, you have to pay for it. Then there will be one that will take everybody from Apapa to Ebute Meta to Agege, Agege to Abado, Abado to Kajola, Kajola to Papalanto, Papalanto to Abeokuta, Abeokuta to Olodo, Olodo to Omeadio to Monia. That can take you that 2 hours you're talking about too, because we will have to stop at every station. You will not see, we have paid for 200 wagons. It will carry nothing, empty. So we'll not even bother to operate it because it will be empty. Break even with such, because it's going to be subsidized. It was not completed. It was worry. Meters of rail. You add it to Abuja Kaduna, which is 186 kilometers. And then Lagos Ibadan, you have about 600 something kilometers of railways. By the time we finish, there are 3,000 plus kilometers of railway. That still makes us one of the lowest, one of the countries that have the lowest kilometer of rail. In about 35,500 or so kilometers of railway, I think about that. And I think not more than 500 kilometers are standard gauge, of narrow gauge, the rest are standard gauge. When the followership, but more of the followership. First is, the railway we met, there is no maintenance. Nobody wants to spend money. Nobody wants to run it. And because literally every institution in Nigeria wants, it has to also do with the caliber of people you appoint to those offices. So when you put people, they see it as, this is my own democracy dividends. If it was under the military, it's their own dividends too. So maintenance. Those stones have to go. You have to replace them with new stones. What you call stones, the ballast. That's what's called in railways. Because every year you must replace 1/3 of the ballast that you have. And we have done 3 years already. We have not replaced any. So you must replace them. Now, for the federal government, and if we do get the approval, we intend to construct, and when we came, Nigerian economists should have said this earlier, there was no railway contract that was awarded to the seaport, yam, cassava. And we don't even export cassava because we eat literally everything we produce here. When we came, the contract for Lagos Ibadan was Ebute Meta to Ibadan. There was no contract for Ebute Meta. Check your Google, you will see that, you will see, why are we talking? Check immediately. Just check. You know, when I tell people, they say, no. When they open, say, As governor, I started building a railway in Port Harcourt because I had the same belief. And my consultants opposed me. I insisted. And you see how many passengers valley. And everything, tie. So you're proud to say, this is from Jand. Perfume. So you are helping to grow the British economy to the detriment of the Nigerian economy. What is the source of our fund? Oil. What are the value chains for oil that we have here? Nothing, literally nothing. And you're very proud. Very soon we'll see this, my fuel is from London. So for me, movement to say, now if you don't want to do the research here, please go home. Has said, whether you like it or not, we will leave as much infrastructure as possible for the next government. It is for Nigerians to begin to produce. Because when the factors of production are okay, the cost of production will do what? Will come down. So-called, you can produce in Ghana and do what? And sell here. So what am I doing here? When there's no power, no water, no security, no logistics. Now, as a governor, I had said this before. There are two things I've said as a governor that resonates in my mind consistently. I first said to the elites, when you don't provide for the poor a legitimate means of livelihood, what would they do? They'll provide for themselves an illegitimate means of livelihood, and you can't sleep again. Those of you who go out to see girlfriends will not go again. You will sit at home, because if you go out, they will take the car back from you. So for railways, we're going to provide railways from, at least the president has assured me that. We will complete Lagos to Ibadan. That will be completed. In fact, if you saw the chairman of CCC the last time he came here about some few days ago, I've walked off Lagos for the past 1 week. And I made sure he came. The agreement is, this is a 6-year contract. I want it executed in 3 years. If I get this project going and I get close to Kaduna, the next government will finish it from Kaduna to Kano and say they started it. So, chairman, you must finish it. He told me, sorry. I said, okay, simple. I'm not an engineer. Come to me. Told me, I didn't research on that you build 1,000 kilometers of railways in China every year. He said, yes. So 1,000 kilometers of railway every year in China, and then you can build 860 kilometers of railway. Those are not equal. In Nigeria, you're not sure of anything. True. And I'll give you an example. Why there is a delay? Oh, they went on a Christmas break. He said there's no Christmas break in China. And one is a problem. But the unskilled ones that you need, you have skilled ones from China. Get some of them if the skilled ones don't come to work. And you deliver the result. I said, you know the difference between me and others? I don't know how God created me. I don't know how my father trained me. I'm so restless that I'm not a big man. I wasn't a big man governor. Neither am I a big man minister. So I don't sit in the office. I give myself, Wednesday to Friday, I clear all my files. Sunday to Monday, I work Sundays. I go for mass, 6 o'clock, I finished. 1 hour, I finish mass, and I hit the road. So I come out to the street, and I'm supervising my work myself. I have no idea of the... He explains, so please deliver. They have assured me in 3 years, they will deliver. They have even assured me of the delivery date of Lagos. here. There is a growth speedily on the transportation contribution to GDP. Check it. Just Google it, you will see it there. But the next difference, what's the difference? The president is doing everything possible to fund transportation. That's one, and you need that. So for us in transportation, we're doing that. You ask, let's leave railways, because I've told you about 5 railways we are constructing. I've told you about Lagos Ibadan. What I've not done is to tell you the date to complete it, but it's very soon. Those who say they're using it and it's 3 hours is because it's called test run. Test run. You don't speed when you're test running. Why? You don't know where there will be a mistake or where there is something that is not supposed to be, and then there will be an accident, and then we have a problem. When they finish test running, I've told you we'll do either 1 hour, 15 to 20 minutes, or we'll do 2 hours for those who want to stop at every station. I've told you about Itabewari. It's completed. If you say it's a lie, join me in the next 2-3 weeks. I'll be going on inspection on Itabewari to see how ready it is for the president to commission. That is ready completely with 1,000 housing estates for workers ready, workshop, yards, everything ready, tracks ready. Okay, there is one outstanding project, and that is communication and signaling. But for a single track lane, you can be running while we're about to start, by the time we have the competition in the next 1 week. I need to give you the figure that there are about 30 million tons of cargo between Lagos to Kano, and one in the south, south, and southeast. The truth, there are 30 million tons of cargo between Lagos and Ibadan. Should we leave that and construct the one where the middle between Port Harcourt and Maiduguri? Which one do we construct first? Which one? No, it's not Calabar. You construct Lagos is, and that's what's called discipline. My president, China Exim Bank, thought to do our railways when under Obasanjo we had about $68 billion in our SS crude account. That was one we were fighting about. People said, my memoir is coming. I will reply Mrs. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. I will. When she said that we said they should not invest that money, she's not correct. She's absolutely not correct. Every time we came for a meeting, National Economic Council meeting, they have taken $1 billion. The next meeting will come, they've taken another $1 billion for a fund that belongs to everybody. When you ask her, I say, President said, you ask her again, say, President said, you say, okay, if people will be taking this money, by the time we know it, in 68 months, everything will have finished. Why I say Nigerians are the problem of Nigeria. The president stopped calling Economic Council meeting after sharing about $10 billion. He stopped calling, and the Constitution, not the law, says at least once a month. You can have 10, but at least once a month. But he stopped completely. And what did he do? Nothing. Nobody did anything. But that's a constitutional breach. That's an impeachable offense. Now let's go to seaports, so I can come down quickly. The president, one in Warri. I don't know how many of you know, and I've said several times, that we don't have seaports in Nigeria. You know, we say that several times. What you have is river ports. Apapa tees off the ocean, Tinkan tees off the ocean, Onne tees off the ocean, Port Harcourt seaport. It's worse in Warri and Calabar. The silting is so bad that you will know that you're in a river. So the first seaport that will take place in Nigeria is the Lekki seaport. Again, it was on paper when we came. Those of you who are criticizing Buhari should listen to me carefully. And so you will know that we are more business friendly than the rest. It was under Obasanjo that this was approved. And it has not been constructed till today. PPP, that was PPP. When we came, debate, I just want this project to take place. Ask them. I left my job and I went with them to China just to reassure the Chinese investors that they will have federal government backing. Today, that project appears to have commenced. That will be the first seaport. When we finish, where are the cargoes? Importation, right? The Akwa Ibom government, I will give you all. I'd like to hear that. You say, oh, people are hungry. We didn't create that hunger, believe me. It is, and I say that. Why I said we didn't create that hunger is that the past government had finished spending all the money we were to spend. They have. we were drafting the budget. The last day we finished the drafting of the budget to send to the National Assembly, guess what happened? Oil price fell from 60 or 50 something to 28. The next day we had to go to National Assembly to 28. What was our benchmark? 45. When they called the next meeting, I said, I'm not coming. Because the volatility of the oil, nobody can determine that. But for $28, we have struggled to put what we have put in place. Fashola is busy with roads. Nobody has, oh, this road is bad. They were all bad before we came. And you need over 1 trillion naira to fix them, not even to build new ones, just to fix them. So I think that this government is by